We're continuing our series, The Master Stroke. If you're visiting us today, I'm just looking around, I think most of you have been present. We've been going through, the last few weeks, we've been looking at Bible prophecy. And each presentation has been building one upon another. As you may know, it's a Bible Q&A, so we're going to go through these pamphlets here. I have some that have been handed out now. And that's for your reference. You can follow it as I'm going. And the title of this presentation is Liberty, as you can see on the screen. And it asks this question: does the Bible talk about a final superpower? Who will be the final superpower? As you know, we've been going through Daniel chapter 7. We noticed its connection to Daniel chapter 2. And as we made a connection to Revelation, we realized as we look at Bible prophecy that the Bible, when Daniel's given these visions, he's been given the visions to understand not just the world around him at the time, but that the world to come. So when Daniel's given these visions, he's given these visions to understand what would follow after his lifetime, all the way up until now, to these end times. And it's always looking at, you'll notice as we looked at, we've been interpreting Bible prophecy from the Bible. I don't know, just if we can recap here. We've looked at what the sea is interpreted as in Bible prophecy. What did we understand the sea to be interpreted as? Peoples, multitudes, and nations. And when we're looking at Bible prophecy, we've learned that the sea is in reference to a populated area. We've looked at the four winds. We notice that comes up in Bible prophecy. And we've allowed the Bible to interpret itself from Jeremiah. In reference to the four winds, he talks about strife, war, commotion, turmoil. And we see these symbols being used in Bible prophecy, and therefore we look to the Bible to find the interpretation. We've also seen beasts. Beasts is a common thing. In these visions, Daniel is seeing beasts, and we're seeing in the book of Daniel itself interpreting what those beasts mean. And what did we understand the beasts mean from Daniel's own writings? It was shown to Daniel that those beasts represented kings and they pointed to kingdoms. Yeah? So that's some of what we've been going through to give us a background. And as we come to today's presentation, it's been interesting to look at how accurately the Bible's been able to tell Daniel in vision not only about the kingdom that he had witnessed in Babylon, but the kingdom that would follow. We saw the Medes and the Persians. We saw Greece come along into the scene. And we see the Bible put the spotlight on these nations for a reason. And it's not to say that these were the only nations or empires that existed. But the Bible puts the spotlight on this. And all the way to the time of Rome, we see that the Bible puts the spotlight on Rome, and all the way to the time that we are now. And we see that illustrated in the statue with the 10 toes. And then we noticed when we went to Daniel 7 that we saw that the imagery changes, but we see some similarities being continued here. And we see God's giving Daniel this vision because he starts to hone in on something in Daniel 7. He says, I'm going to cover the same ground that I covered in Daniel chapter 2, but now in Daniel 7, I'm going to change the imagery because I need to give more detail. So we left off in Daniel chapter 2 with the 10 toes, and we understand that is the Western Europe, as we know, pointing to the 10 toes. And then as we come to Daniel 7, he goes, I want to give you more information. So now, rather than 10 toes, we get what? We get 10 horns. And then, because he wants to give us more information, we see something happening in the time of these 10 horns. We see 3 of those horns are removed. And then again, the Bible starts to put the spotlight and point the finger at something. God puts his finger on something for Daniel to see so that we can see it today. And what does he put his finger on? He says, there's a little horn that is going to come up. And it's not just a little horn on its own. It's a little horn with eyes like a man and a mouth like a man, a mouth that speaks. And so we see that the Bible goes, that God goes to great length and great detail to show Daniel and hone in and put his finger on this little horn power, which we now understand to be the Antichrist. Based on the last two presentations, we started with one with what does the Bible have to say about the Antichrist, and then taking all the evidence and we moved into the second presentation and we're able to identify who the Antichrist is. And it's not it's not a casual topic that we just we bring out and say, hey, this is, now we can point the finger at what we think is the Antichrist. It's what we know from Scripture. What we know, it's amazing when I think about it and when I reflect on how Bible prophecy stands the test of time. When you look at the book of Daniel, it was written, do you know off the top of your head, Paul? Because Paul's really good with dates. The book of Daniel, when do you think that was written? Yeah, about 500 BC, they say, about 500 to 600 BC. And then the book of Revelation was written, they estimate, about 100 years, I'd say, after. Is that correct? The book of Revelation? Yeah, within that time. And so there's about 600 to 700 years difference between the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. And it hasn't, we have not needed to change anything about this vision. This vision was given. The vision was given to Daniel. It was recorded. It was written. Those symbols continue to stand the test of time up until today. And up until today in 2026, we have the privilege of looking at these visions, one given to Daniel, and then the visions given to John, and we realize how they are connected. And we're not the first ones to realize this. Anyone that has ever studied the Bible, and we've mentioned this in our presentations, that when we look at the subject of Bible prophecy, we don't get to choose what God is giving us in Bible prophecy. God is the author. God is the one that's selecting the material. It's not us as a church that's saying we want a church that talks about the Antichrist. The church that we now are a part of and we gather to today, we're a part of a Protestant church. And when we continue a long line of believers, starting from the time of Christ, that held firm to the belief that whatever God gives us in this word is sufficient. And so when we look at the Bible, we don't get to choose Bible prophecy. And when we look at Bible prophecy, this is the subject that comes up, the Antichrist. And so if you're asking, what is the relevance of this? I came here just to hear a sermon about Jesus. Why are we talking about the Antichrist? Why are we talking about superpowers? Because the vision was given. It was given for Daniel so he would understand the times he was living in and the times that were ahead. And not just for Daniel, but for the church. Up until when Jesus came, up until after Jesus was resurrected, all the way through, this vision has stood, and we continue to read the same vision. This is not an edited vision. You cannot change these symbols, yet we can find the interpretation from the Bible. And so when we do look at that, we find that God is saying, from the beginning of time, I've been doing a work. I'm carrying out the work of salvation since the fall of man. He created the world, and sin entered the world. And as a result, the wages of sin is death. And we live with that curse today. We're born into that. We're born into that curse. And from the beginning of time, God has been doing a work which started with the promise that Jesus Christ would come. Started with the promise that salvation and redemption, and there was hope for us in the seed of the woman. And from the beginning of time, in a similar way, the devil has had a work to do. The devil has sought to counter God's work every step of the way. And you'll know that's true in your own personal life. As God continues to try to do a work in your life, come into your life, reveal himself to you, The devil, in a similar way, is seeking to counter that every step of the way. That's why Jesus said, he goes, the thief comes not but to steal, kill, and destroy. He made something very plain to us. He says, in your life, there is a devil on your tail constantly from birth that is going to seek to keep you away from me. And yet Jesus gives us the promise. He goes, but I have come that they might have life and life more abundantly. God is, we face that choice every day, even today as we sit here. We look to Jesus and we understand Jesus is trying to do a work in our life, and we understand that the devil is constantly doing a work. But yet when we look at Bible prophecy puts a microscope on what's happening behind the scenes, on how this is being, how this battle is being waged out spiritually, how the devil is directly waging this war against God. And that's why I believe when we go to Bible prophecy and we don't get to choose what God speaks about, God chooses this topic and says, I need you now to understand how the battle's being waged against me, the kingdom, and how you will suffer as a result of this by default if you don't understand the bigger picture. And that's what Bible prophecy does for us. I know it can become boring even for some to talk about dates, to talk about symbols, to talk about visions. But if we understand that it is God that is choosing to reveal this to Daniel so that it can be revealed to you. It is God that's choosing to reveal this to John while he sits there, exiled on that island. He's given this vision for a purpose. And yet Christianity today has relegated the visions of Daniel and John to something that is like extracurricular if you need it. And, we are given that promise, yet we're given this promise in 2 Timothy that all scripture is given by inspiration of God and profitable for us. We would do well to look at this. And so when we get to who will be the final superpower, God is not saying it's going to be the only superpower that exists. Because, and I'm glad we have the Bible to guide us, because if we, and I've mentioned this before, if we just allowed the times to define and current events to define how we interpreted the scripture, things change like fashion, and our beliefs would change. And yet the vision remains the same. The interpretation remains the same. It doesn't need to change, regardless of what's happening in the world, regardless if one superpower seems to be the Antichrist. But if the Bible doesn't describe it and it doesn't fit the criteria of the Bible, then it is not. We can't apply it. And so now that we've established that the papacy, the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican, the smallest state in the world, ruled not only politically but by religious power, is that little horn power that sits in the temple of God, opposes God, but seeks the worship of God that belongs to God alone. We've established that from the presentations, and there are some Bible study guides there if you need further information. But yet, we're going to move to the next part here. We've got a few questions to get through. What are we looking at here? Following the masterstroke theme of art, we have an artwork of a piece of art, which is a sculpture. That was just a bit of it. So we're looking here at the Statue of Liberty. It doesn't really give you the whole painting here. But there's some information about that painting. If you've got one of these guides, it'll tell you about it. But it was I'll read some of it. Where is it here? It says, on October 28th, 1886, thousands of spectators boarded their boats to witness the unveiling of the dedication of the Statue of Liberty. This copper-clad sculpture on Bedloe's Island, known as Liberty Island, embodies everything that America represents, including freedom. Liberty holds her torch aloft while grasping a tablet inscribed with the date of the Declaration of Independence in her hand. In her other hand, one hand's the torch, one hand she has the Declaration. Representing the abolition of slavery, her left foot stands on a broken chain and shackle. Edward Moran, an English artist who moved to the United States at the age of 15, met the sculptor who designed the Lady Liberty a decade before the statue's final unveiling. France built and gifted the statue to celebrate freedom and democracy, hallmarks of both countries. Moran's patriotic painting, Unveiling of the Statue of Liberty, Enlightening the World, depicts the moment when a 21-gun salute heralds President Cleveland's arrival for the statue's dedication. American and French flags fly on ships, mingling with the cannon smoke that fills New York's harbor. Above everything proud and triumphant stands liberty. Moran aimed to inspire hope in the immigrants like himself, regardless of their origins, by conveying that they were arriving in a welcoming land of opportunity, freedom, and safety. This country was on the rise, inviting people from other lands to join that journey. The United States is now the dominant global influence in all key aspects of civilizations: politics, economics, culture, military, technology, and science. Does the Bible predict the rise and the rule of the United States? If so, how does the Bible portray America's perspective and influence on religious liberty? How significant is it to have American leaders in both the Christian and political realms? What role will global governments play in shaping the world religion? And will there be a resurgence of religious persecution? That's basically what you've got written there. I was looking at some dates. America has quite an interesting history. I'm not have to do the PowerPoint here. Okay. We've just read through that. If you turn to the book of Daniel, book of Revelation, Revelation chapter 13, we see that we carry on our study from Daniel chapter 7. Revelation 13. So to simplify Bible prophecy, we looked at Daniel chapter, what number was it? 7. And 7 in particular is the one that draws a line from the time of Daniel all the way up to our time today, identifying the little horn power. That is the significance of Daniel chapter 7. It doesn't say that in Daniel chapter 2 or any other chapter. Daniel chapter 7 is the chapter that we go to understand how do we identify the Antichrist power. And why was it relevant? Because in Daniel chapter 7, it draws that line of that little horn coming into power all the way up until today. And that's why it's relevant. When we get to Revelation chapter 13, just going to skip through this. We see two beasts. And we're going to start in verse 1. And I'm going to read that. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. This is the first beast. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. There are 2 superpowers represented in Revelation chapter 13. We're going to read up until verse 10, and that's going to deal with the first beast. Verse 4. And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given to him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme in his name, and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations, and all that dwell upon the earth. shall worship him, whose names were not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If any man have an ear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience of the saints. So we've got 8 specific clues here. We applied a similar method when we were looking at Daniel chapter 7, and we identified 10 clues from Daniel chapter 7, basically taking 10 clues that were given in the vision to form a criteria which would allow us to identify what was that little horn power. If it didn't match all of the 10 clues, we couldn't reasonably identify who the Antichrist was. But we noticed that as we went through the 10 clues, we had to follow that as a guide, and not just apply what we wanted to indicate who the Antichrist was. In a similar way, when we come to 13, we've identified 8 clues that we can take from this passage to apply to who the first beast was. Sorry, we're just moving on. The first thing that we notice about the beast in if we go back to verse 1, is that it includes the same physical characteristics that we see are given to the 4th beast in Daniel chapter 7. Now, the 4th beast is where we saw the little horn come from. We see it applied to the 4th beast, the 3rd, the 2nd, and the 1st. All those beasts had similar characteristics to what we're seeing here. We see the beast, it starts in the reverse order here. It says the leopard, like unto a leopard, his feet were as the feet of a bear, his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power. So what we can observe from looking at the first beast here is that it's carrying on the same physical characteristics of what we saw described in Daniel chapter 7, and then it starts to now give us more information as it draws a connection with the second beast. Clue number 1, it rises from the sea, a highly populated area. Clue number 2, it speaks blasphemies against God, as we've seen in Daniel chapter 7:25. Clue number 3, it persecutes God's people. And what separates this apart is clue number 4, it persecutes or rules for 1260 years. 1260 years, we looked at time prophecy to do with 1260 years. We saw that that date was given from the time of Justinian, when he basically claimed Rome to be it became the Holy Roman Empire from the time of 538. And from the time that Napoleon received its deadly wound, we see there was a 1260 period, which can be referred to as the Dark Ages there. 1260 years in Bible prophecy refers to the 1260 days. We looked at a times and a half. But in this actual Revelation 13, you'll notice the same time prophecy is given in 42 months. You'll notice there in verse 5, and there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. So we see with this particular power that it's given this same time frame that is described in different ways, and yet we arrive with the same number. 42 months. If we apply a 30-day principle to all those months, and we multiply 40 by 30, and we're going to come back to that figure of 1260. That's how we're making the connections between 1260 and 42 months. So we're seeing that Although it's not written in the direct same way as Daniel chapter 7, we're seeing that the same characteristics are crossing over. They're translating over to chapter 13. Now, it can be said that there have been other powers or other individuals that have persecuted God's people, blasphemed God's name, but no other power or can fit the description of the 1260 years, and that's why we've got it up there for 1260 years. And so you can see why it is important for Bible prophecy to go into such accurate detail, because if it was very vague, we could just apply that to anyone who was wicked in history. The 1260 years, understanding the 1260 years, which is in fact the 40 and 2 months, or the times, and time and a half. Time referring to a year, times are referring to 2 years, time and a half, half a time meaning half a year, 3.5 years. If we apply the same formula to 3.5 years, and we break that down to days, we're coming back to 1260 days. You're having the same time. I know this might be a bit much to follow, but you'll find that the same time reference is mentioned more than every time in connection with this persecuting power. And that's what we're seeing in Daniel 7. We're seeing it again here in Daniel 13, in Revelation 13. And this is how we're able to, as students, make a connection. That's how we're making this connection with this beast. Okay, that was just that point I was making. Here are the things that we're reading. That's just a summary of it. Persecutes God's people, speaks blasphemies against God, rises out of the sea, and it will rule for 1260 years. All what you're basically reading there is what we're seeing in Daniel chapter 7. We're seeing the same thing. A time reference is given, and these are the characteristics of the beast. It's a different imagery, but it's incorporating all the characteristics from Daniel 7. It's using the leopard, it's using the bear, it's using the mouth of the lion, and it has the horns. And so, I don't know if that's clear to you, but as you look at it, you'll see the connection is definitely there. Just move out of this. I was looking at some history, and we came to that conclusion about who the Antichrist is. And we were talking about how ultimately behind the Antichrist, while we are talking about nations and kingdoms and beasts, talking about powers coming into power that affect and impact us in the world we live and move in, we understand that behind that ultimately is the dragon. It says, what additional features of the first beast can be identified? We can see the answer to that is found in Revelation 13:2. If we look in on that, it says, it receives power from the dragon. The dragon symbolizes the devil, and we see that in Revelation chapter 12. And the devil often operates through the pagan nations, and you'll see some commentary on that. But ultimately behind this is like I was trying to allude to before and paint a bigger picture, that while God is continuing his work, he needs us to be aware of the work, the counter work that is going against him. There's work that's going against him, and this is why it's being highlighted, because ultimately behind that is the dragon. We see the devil has the work to do. So the dragon gives, what's significant about the little horn power is that ultimately the devil is behind it. It wouldn't have any relevance in Bible prophecy or for God to highlight it if he wasn't focusing, if God wasn't trying to show us where the devil and where Satan is working. Okay, we've been through this. Global power. Okay, so let's just follow this study. Let's get to question number 3. I'm going to move on. I'm going to skip ahead to. So here's here's some extra information that comes from the guide. We know that it's a global power. The term Catholic means universal. There's no greater example of a universal power than the Catholic Church, which is present in virtually every nation around the world. You know, when we look at America and how America was started, we're going to read into this prophecy here in verses 11 to 18, and you're going to see how when the Antichrist, when they were preaching about the Antichrist in the Reformation, and this is going back to our previous presentations, I was taking notes of a couple of the dates there. Now we know the Reformation was around the 1500s, around the 1500s. There's a few notes that I noted, and it's just Martin Luther, we know, was one of the main reformers. He passed away in 1546. I was just taking these dates down. The Counter-Reformation, what they call the Counter-Reformation, started in 1546, a year after his death. They had what they called the Council of Trent. When we go back into history and we read around what's happening outside this Bible study, we'll see how this Bible study, see it come to life. You see, what happened was the Antichrist was identified by the reformers based on the Bible studies we've been doing. The church, the Catholic Church, found themselves in a predicament where they had to defend themselves, and so they had, from that point onwards, they had to now move forward with a counter argument to the teachings that we are sharing from the Bible through these presentations. And to do that, they had to come up with obviously a different teaching, their understanding, or a teaching that would void the truth about who the man of sin was. And so it's interesting that when Martin Luther passes away, you have the Reformation, and you'll see that the Church of England, you might be familiar with the Church of England and the Anglican Church. You'll notice that they broke away in the 1500s too, just before Martin Luther passed away. So you see that the king turns his back on and they had this, it's called the Westminster Confession, where the Parliament in England basically said, we want to get together like people who are qualified to speak on religious matters, and we want them to basically draft a document that will highlight what we believe and what is what is acceptable as far as faith goes, and within that declaration, that document, the Church of England identifies the Antichrist as the Pope. It rejects the Pope's claims of who he is, and yet even within the Church of England, we see that the influence of the Catholic Church still was not fully broken. And so then you had people coming out of the Church of England, and which we refer to as Puritans, or people who just didn't agree that they had made a total cut from the Pope's influence. And these same people are the ones that started to become persecuted at the time. And so, fleeing that religious persecution, you have events like in history, like the Mayflower, where they went to America and went to look for a new land. And that's, as you look back in history, you see all these dates start to line up, and 1600, that you have the first British colony, and then leading up to this Statue of Liberty that we're looking at, so another 100 or nearly 200 years later, you're going to have the independence. But you'll see that from all the way as we backtrack in time, the Catholic Church has been seeking to counter that teaching that we've got from the Bible, that the Reformers found, that's been passed down to us. And the Church of England today, or all the faiths which their pioneers, their reformers believed that the Antichrist was the Pope, the churches that were founded based on their Reformation, they don't hold to this teaching anymore. It's not going to be preached in their churches anymore. And while it might be a heavy subject, it might be maybe not even, may seem not relevant to what's going on in your life today, this teaching is actually being given, is a teaching that did stand at one time. It was highlighted by the Protestant Reformation. America became a Protestant nation. It wasn't a Catholic. When they set up in America, it was the Protestants that were setting up. And so it's interesting when you come to when we come all the way to today, to 2026. There's no more protest, and there's the teaching of highlighting and putting a finger on what we need to track to avoid deception. That teaching is now irrelevant. And that's why this teaching is being continually shared in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So we don't forget what God needs us to understand. We're going to move through to the second beast. We see there some of the things that are mentioned here. The papacy receives a deadly wound in 1798. That's the end of the 1260 period. We're trying to understand how it's given power. And then when the Pope was captured and stripped of his political powers in 1929, Mussolini and the Catholic leadership reached an agreement that restored the Vatican's political status. You can see that that refers to verse 4 here in Revelation chapter 13. Verse 3 and 4, and I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death. This wound is referring to the time when the papacy did was put down by Napoleon. His deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after him. That's what that's referring to. So we see with accuracy the Bible describing what would happen to the little horn power and how it would come back. And how would it come back? Verse 4, and they worshipped the dragon, which gave power to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, who is like the beast, who is able to make war with him. This is not going on. Sorry, let me just skip ahead. Okay, we're going to go into the second beast. That's what I want to skip up to. There is only one political power that fits all the clues. This is what we've been talking about, the Roman papacy. And we're going to move on to the second beast. Reading in Revelation chapter 13, verse 11. And I beheld another beast coming out of, what does the Bible say? The earth. So it's different to the first beast already. It doesn't come out of the sea. And he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them that dwell in therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he does great wonders, so that he make fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceives them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by a sword and did live. Which beast had the wound by the sword, but then did live? Obviously, in context, we're going back to the first beast. Now, as we look at the second beast and we look at the topic of today is there a final superpower? The reason why it's presented this way, is there a final superpower? Because when God is talking about Bible prophecy, and we're finished with Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 7, and Bible prophecy ultimately leads to this. End-time Bible prophecy. End-time Bible prophecy leads to highlighting who this beast power. And the reason why it's called, is there a final superpower? Because the Bible only speaks of one other beast coming to aid this beast. And that's why they're called the two beasts of Revelation 13. It doesn't go in time to talk about China, doesn't talk about Russia, doesn't talk about anyone else. it says, when we look at Bible prophecy, here we are in the end times with that first, with the beast, with the little horn, and here is a second beast connected with it. That's why it's called the final superpower. It is the final superpower of relevance because it is the superpower that causes the world to worship the first beast. It has a connection with the first beast. It has a crucial connection with the first beast. And that's why it hones in on this second beast. And that's why we're reading it. And it says, and he had power, verse 15, and he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causes all, both great and small, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand and in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that has understanding count the number of the beast. It is the number of a man. We're coming back to the little horn again, that speaks like a man, has eyes like a man. And it says, and his number is what? 666. Now, remember I was trying to, in my best way, describe why this is relevant, because as we're getting to the end time and we're talking about the mark of the beast, 666, the number of a man, and it includes the whole world, and it includes worship, and it's talking about the persecution of God's people. We're tracking this beast all the way back to Daniel chapter 7. And so Daniel chapter 7 is so important for you and I to bring us back to this time to see who that beast is that's getting the worship. We know that it is ultimately the dragon, that it is the devil behind it. So it's the devil basically manifesting himself physically in this world through a physical, political, religious power. Something that relates to us. If it was just a spiritual power, it wouldn't be enough. You know, it has, in order to rule over men, it has to be a kingdom. It has to have like a ruling power from a man. And so we see that this is where the Vatican, this is where the Pope, and now we see the second beast is being, it has an ally in the second beast to make sure the objective of the first beast to receive worship is achieved. And so this is where the second beast is important. Let's move forward here. We see the initial description of the second beast. Three major clues within this prophecy enable us to identify this nation of the second beast. Many Bible scholars today hold the belief that this power signifies the United States. Let's examine the evidence. What is the initial description? John, the writer of Revelation, described the first beast going into captivity. This occurred in 1798 when the Pope was taken captive and the papacy was stripped of its power. Then I saw another beast coming up. This is where the revelation goes. The new power would begin to emerge around the same time that the previous power experienced its downfall. The United States declared its independence in 1776, even though they had people migrating there as early as 1400s, 1500s from religious persecution. This is all in time with the Reformation. If we understand what was happening in the Reformation, we see it has a connection with America because of religious freedom, hence the Statue of Liberty. Ratified its constitution in 1788, adopted its Bill of Rights in 1791. By 1798, the United States was recognized internationally as a nation and was emerging as a world power. What is the initial description? Let's have a look. In stark contrast to the other political powers in Daniel and Revelation, the second beast arises from the earth. Instead of the sea, we know that the sea represents a vastly populated area. Therefore, it would be logical for the earth to signify the opposite, a land of very few people. The United States did not emerge from the masses of Europe or Asia. It was born from a sparsely populated continent known as the New World. Let's keep going on this. Like a lamb, we see that this second beast is a lamb, established on two key principles: civil liberty and religious liberty, a country without a king and a church without a pope. This nation would be a young, innocent, peace-loving, and Christian in its ideals. Like a dragon, this freedom-loving nation will ultimately adopt a global role in which power and control become more important than peace and liberty. Only one global power fits the clues: the United States of America. If the United States is indeed the final superpower, what should our attitude be toward this nation and its people? Should we hate them? The United States is a nation blessed by God. We'll go into, and it's the same way when we had the study about Sunday keeping. We had the study about the Antichrist and the Catholic Church. These studies are not, the purpose of these studies is not for us to then be able to point the finger ourselves personally at an individual or a person. It's to allow us to understand where the devil is moving and how things are going to unfold, and to make sure we find ourselves on the right side. What will the United States achieve and implement as it grows in power? Let's have a look. The United States is the most powerful country in the world. I think that's been very clear for a number of decades now, primarily due to its economic and military strength. Military spending exceeds the combined expenditures of the next 9 countries. Just a few points on America. The Bible predicts that the largely evangelical United States will form an alliance, and this is what we're seeing between the two beasts, will form an alliance with the papacy, the first beast, blending church and state, and it causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast. You see this, and this is the issue that we have here as the persecution that was carried out in the time of the Dark Ages, Rome. When we talk about when the papacy came to power, the persecution was so severe due to one main fact, and that is you had the church and the state combined, having power. The church had power to enforce law, and so what we sought to do in the free world is to separate the two and say we need to have freedom of conscience. We need to be able to be free to worship. And so we had things like the Statue of Liberty and what that was supposed to stand for. And so what we're seeing here through the book of Revelation, we're giving this, God is saying, you know what, it's going to happen again this way. In order for me to achieve what I started when the papacy first started, it's going to take back its power, and it's going to receive worship against. You see, it's all about worship in the end. The world is changing rapidly, and we live on the edge of eternity. The Bible predicts that the final world government will undermine the liberty of conscience. You'll notice that's been taken away from us for a while now. Significant events like 9/11 impacted, a lot of laws to do with our personal freedoms and privacy. And as we look, if you look into this area of how that line is being blurred, you will find a lot of information. But yet, what is the central issues that ultimately divides the world? Just got a few more questions to get through. The final global issue will center on worship. The commandment that specifically relates to the worship and obedience of the Creator God is the Sabbath. If a law were enforced today to worship on Sunday, the day chosen by mainstream Christianity, who would you worship and obey? Now, let's move forward. Something to think about. How does the devil deceive people into believing in a false religion? A counterfeit religious revival will sweep the world, uniting the world's religions. Notice when we were reading in Revelation 13 about having the power to perform all sorts of miracles and signs. A counterfeit religious revival will sweep the world, uniting the world's religions. Religious healings and miracles will be so persuasive that they will also unite the world's nations. In what ways will the final superpower ultimately enforce its control? As the United States gains greater power, obviously exercises greater control. So we're seeing these issues come up in Revelation 13. We're seeing that there is an issue of power over the world economy, the ability to restrict or even stop your trading, your buying or your selling, based on whether you conform or not. The United States is the hub of international finance and business. It is a country that talks tough in its trade negotiations, doing whatever it takes to maintain control. Have we seen that recently? And yet, if you took this study, I don't know, 50 years ago, you might not be able to say all these things about America. Yet, this study, this vision was given, and it has remained the same. And it allows us today in the end times to really apply it to ourselves and to our surroundings. Here's one that's very interesting. When we look at Revelation 13:15, if you didn't notice it, this beast will have the power to determine life and death. And it says, and has caused as many as would not worship the image to be what? To be killed. So some very serious things here that are connected with these two beasts in the end time. And this is why we're looking at it. United States has traditionally been known for its fairness and love of freedom. Hence, when we're talking about the lamb-like beast, it's a lamb. And it says, in the last days, those who do not worship and obey the church-state government will be killed for their true faith and love for Jesus. We're seeing history repeat itself, basically. They're going to have this beast is going to have the power to impose the mark of the beast. Revelation 13:16, he causes all, both small and great and rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or their foreheads. You know, there's many people out there theorizing on what they think the mark of the beast is, but at the end of the day, if we don't understand who the two beasts are that are connected to the mark of the beast, then we will not be able to accurately understand what it's talking about. Revelation 13 concludes with both superpowers, the United States and the papacy, reaching a climax of power simultaneously. This will lead to the implementation of the mark of the beast. The Bible states that if you receive the mark of the beast, you will be safe from the government, but unsafe with God. Conversely, if you refuse the mark of the beast, you will be safe with God, but unsafe with the government. In such a difficult time, it is important to obey God rather than men. How can you avoid being among those who disobey God? What do you think the answer is to that? It's John 15:15. It gives us a text there, and that is to establish our relationship with our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. The reference in the Bible study is to the vine, being connected to Jesus. The only way to remain true to God is to abide in Jesus. John 15:15 talks about that. What promise is given to those who are persecuted for the sake of Christ and his righteousness? We've got a promise that's given us there, and it says, for those who suffer with him, Jesus promises an eternal life. The text was there, but you can't see it. It's in Matthew chapter 5, verse 10. And it says, blessed are those, who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You know, we read about this, but in reality, in real time, do you think it's not going to be as easy to just say no, is it? I think we've seen that. A good example would have been the COVID-19. It wasn't an easy time for to say no to what the government was saying, and yet it was so it was pushed in such a strong, unique way that you felt like you were not loyal if you did not listen, or you were doing harm to your neighbor if you did not do what the government was asking you to do for your own safety. And I'm not going to go into that whole debate, but I know firsthand, and we all experience that. I turn the radio on every day, and it was just, if you did not agree with what the government was saying, the radio hosts were just ostracizing people and just saying, basically making them out to be murderers if they did not listen to the government and just take the vaccination that was available, that was being promoted. And when we read about what we're reading about here, about being persecuted, like to stand up for something that is on your conscience, that is not right. It's not an easy position to take. I'd even dare say that it's impossible to take that position if it's not based on our faith, if we're not spiritually grounded in Christ, if Christ is not giving us the faith to do that, because we can sway so easily under the pressures of, well, what about your family, or what about this, or what about that? Very easily you'll say, I've heard a lot of people say, well, I've got to go to work, just give it to me anyway. And we're going to come to a time when the Bible's trying to warn us, is saying it's going to come to a time where it's either you're safe with God, unsafe with the government, safe with the government, unsafe with God. And yet God gives us this promise that you will be blessed. And, if we have faith, it will be enough. 3 points to remember. The first piece of Revelation 13 represents the same power as the Antichrist little horn of Daniel 7, the Roman papacy. I hope that's clear by now. The second beast of Revelation 13 represents the final superpower in history, the United States. The issue that will divide the world is worship linked to obedience. And yet that obedience can't come forward without a knowledge of the scriptures. And that's why we're here today going over this. Personal questions and answers. Do you find the future worrying? Do you perceive worry as a sign of lacking faith? What would you do if your government asked you to do something that contradicts God's principles? Can you prepare yourself for potential persecution? How? What will you do this week to ensure you abide in Jesus? And so, just want to encourage you with this presentation. God has revealed that knowledge to us as a privilege, but the purpose of this presentation is to encourage believers, all believers that are gathered here today, to look for God while he may be found, to establish a relationship with him, and to understand God's kingdom, everlasting kingdom, is coming. And that is something we can either not just wait for, but God is asking us to live for that kingdom so that when it does come, we can be ready for that kingdom. Okay. That's the presentation done. I think we'll close that. Thank you.